You sure that's your money? The question dropped into the bank lobby like a brick in glass. Not loud, not aggressive, but sharp, the kind of sharp that didn't bleed right away, hidden behind the dull edges of politeness. Officer Danny Brooks stood with one hand resting on his belt, eyeing the black woman at the counter like she had stumbled into the wrong world. His face, pale and tight-lipped, was calm. His eyes weren't. Kaya Bennett didn't shift. She didn't raise her voice or furrow her brow. She simply handed over the stack of neatly bound bills to the teller and waited. $8,000 in cash. That was all it took to change the energy in the room. Where are you from? Have you ever been judged based on your appearance before you even spoke a word? If you believe discrimination has no place in the world, hit that subscribe button and share this story. Kaya had walked into First National Bank just after 10 a.m. She chose this branch on purpose. Less crowded, more quiet, tucked in the brick and glass heart of Richmond's business district. She wore jeans and a navy crew neck, soft sneakers beneath her, a minimalist crossbody bag slung with ease. Her hair was pulled back in a simple twist. No jewelry, no show, nothing flashy. But to some eyes, her very presence was loud. She wasn't there to cause a scene. Kaya never did. She just needed to deposit payment from one of her government consulting contracts. She'd been paid in cash before. It wasn't rare, and it wasn't illegal, but it was inconvenient, especially when placed in hands like Brooks. He was off duty, dressed in Richmond PD blues anyway. Supplemental gig. Security detail, probably bored. Kaya had noticed the moment she stepped in. His body language change, the flocking of his eyes from other people to her. He stood too close to the teller counter, hovering like a question no one had asked. The teller, a young woman with anxious fingers, had smiled at first. But as soon as she began counting the bills, her smile had started twitching. She whispered something under her breath, then looked to Brooks, who stepped forward without even being called. That's when the first question came. Not, how can I help you today? Not, what account is this going into? But, are you sure that's yours? That's how it begins. Before the paperwork. Before the logic. Before they've even heard your name. Brooks asked for ID next, 2 forms, no apology. Kaya handed them over without pause. Virginia driver's license. Federal contractor clearance card. Marked, Gov use only. He examined them in silence, turning them over like fake coupons from a game catalog. Kaya said nothing. She didn't defend. She didn't need to. Still, it wasn't enough. She says she's depositing. For work? The teller muttered sideways to Brooks after glancing blankly at her monitor filled with account numbers and balances. The pair pored over it like investigators at a crime scene. Brooks asked what kind of work. Not curious. Suspicious. Kaya replied with a single sentence, naming a federal agency he clearly didn't recognize. She couldn't get more specific. Not without breaching protocol, confidentiality, or worse. But that wasn't the point. He wasn't really asking. He was already deciding. He turned and leaned into her space, not physically, but with the kind of attention that makes you feel cornered. He told her she'd have to wait while they verified the funds. Didn't explain what that meant. Didn't define the rules being followed. Just took her money, her cards, and her piece, and walked off to the manager's office without a glance back. Kaya stood at the edge of the lobby, near the privacy rope. Unmoving. The other customers whispered. One woman in a floral dress clutched her purse tighter. A man in a blazer looked at Kaya, then away, then back again. Their eyes scanned the scene, trying to decode the quiet panic. To them, she was either a criminal or a mystery. Either way, she didn't fit the script for client. A few seats away, an older man, black, dressed in a beige suit, watched her the whole time. His gaze wasn't invasive. It was knowing, like he'd been there, like he was still there. Brooks emerged 10 minutes later, holding a walkie in one hand, murmuring into it like he was ordering backup. Kaya heard enough. Possibly fraudulent activity. Uncooperative. Suspicious cash. Looks like a setup. Setup. The word rang louder than the walls. She hadn't raised her voice. Hadn't resisted. Hadn't said one thing out of place. But here it was, already rewritten. The manager followed behind him, red tie crooked, sweat at his collar. He didn't meet her eyes. Another officer entered the bank. Then another. For $8,000. 8,000 of her own earned money. The lobby had grown heavy now. Sky outside still bright and civil, but in here, the oxygen had changed shape. Kaya's phone buzzed once inside her pocket. A calendar ping. Briefing in 2 hours. Mandatory. She ignored it. Brooks walked back to her. Asked her again. Where did the money come from? Despite already hearing it. She repeated what she was allowed to say. Steady. Her voice didn't waver. He didn't believe her. Maybe he hadn't from the beginning. He asked to search her bag. The crowd pretended not to see. As he unzipped the inside pocket, sifting through innocent items like breath mints and pens, Kaya inhaled slowly. Not for patience, but precision. Because each question was more than a false assumption. It was a trigger, a step deeper into something bigger than her. And Kaya knew what they didn't. They thought they were dealing with a woman alone in sneakers with cash. But they were interfering with something federal, something monitored, and something that would soon burn clarity into the eyes of everyone pointing fingers. They just didn't know it yet. Then Brooks pulled her aside. Said the bank had reason to detain her until federal verification arrived. Still, she didn't flinch, because Kaya's credentials ran deeper than the one in his hand. And truth has a way of rising, even when it's being buried by badges. So stay with this story. Things were just getting started. The way Officer Brooks looked at Kaya didn't change when she handed over the federal ID. If anything, it only deepened his disbelief. She'd expected it. The moment his eyes skimmed the badge, the way his brow folded, his lips pushed together. That look people give when they're handed a truth so different than the one they've already decided. A truth too inconvenient to accept. Brooks glanced at the ID again. Like reading it twice might reveal a flaw or catch her in a lie. But Kaya said nothing, just stood tall beside the counter, arms by her sides, calm as ever. The tension didn't exist in her hands or her tone. It lived in his raised shoulders, in the way he tapped his foot without rhythm, in the way the teller's fingers seemed too shaky now to click the right keys. He didn't ask what project she was working on or who had paid her. He just questioned why someone like her would be carrying that much cash. He didn't say someone like you, but he didn't have to. The space between his words said it all. Then came the clipboard. A form so generic it could have been meant for anything. A catch-all created for situations like these, where suspicion was more valuable than proof. The form asked if she would consent to a temporary hold of the deposit. It warned that bank security had the right to involve law enforcement if she refused. Kaya didn't sign it right away. Not because she had something to hide. Because she wanted to remember. Every word. Every line. One day this would matter. Not just for her, but for others. Still, she didn't resist. She never raised her voice. The rumor that she was being uncooperative? It grew from nothing. From her quiet. From her refusal to lower her dignity to match their fear. Soon the backup that Brooks had quietly called in began to arrive. 2 more officers entered the bank, their boots thudding softly against the polished floors. They didn't draw weapons or shout commands. They didn't need to. Intimidation wore a badge just fine without noise. One officer took Kaya's ID. Another stood behind her, closing the gap between her back and the waiting area filled with customers. There was nowhere to go now, and everyone knew it. She asked once, softly, if she could call her supervisor. She explained she had a scheduled government briefing, that she had responsibilities this delay would affect. They told her to wait. Her explanation drifted through the glass and was swallowed by silence. Around them, people watched. No one left. No one moved. A man near the exit lowered his phone under his blazer, pretending not to record. A woman resting 2 chairs away from Kaya whispered to someone on speaker, describing what she was seeing. They're detaining her. Just standing here. She's not even saying anything. The camera lenses began to rise, quietly, respectfully, but with purpose now. One person focused tightly on Kaya's hands. Still open, still folded in front of her. Another zoomed in on the form she hadn't signed, the badge on Officer Brooks' chest, and Kaya's laptop bag where it rested untouched against the marble wall. Time stretched out. Every minute felt like a performance. Like people on one side were waiting for her to slip so they could say they were justified. While everyone else, the witnesses, the silent ones with phones in their hands, understood what they were seeing. Racial bias wasn't always loud. It didn't always need to yell or slam someone to the ground. Sometimes, it just looked like disbelief in a black woman's voice. The bank manager came back around the corner. His face was thin with nerves, cheeks dotted in sweat. He stayed behind the counter, breaking eye contact every few seconds. He acted like this wasn't his choice, like this was protocol. But Kaya had seen false protocols used to cover cowardice before. This wasn't her first time feeling like a stain someone wished would just resolve itself. Brooks leaned over the counter again, speaking loudly enough now so the crowd could hear. "We're running her paperwork by HQ. We've seen fraudulent government IDs before." The teller nodded like she understood, like this made sense, like delaying the process was safer than trusting it. When Brooks' voice said fraudulent, Kaya felt the jump in the room, heard the unseen whisper echo. She must be fake. She doesn't belong. Still, she stood tall. There would be no tears, no pleading, no desperate explanation, because she knew what came next, and she would not give them her power in trying to explain the truth they had already been given. One officer blocked the front door now, not by force, just position, a barrier made of assumption. Kaya's phone buzzed again. Her briefing started in 30 minutes. She asked again, this time for her phone call, the one she had a federal right to. Brooks smirked, told her she wasn't under arrest, that she was being cooperatively detained, which meant she had none of the rights an arrested person did, but every restriction. There she stood in the lobby of a place meant to serve the public, and none of her credentials, none of her calm, none of her quiet made a difference, because her skin decided everything before her voice had a chance. Customers began whispering louder now. Some expressed confusion. A woman near the back asked, "Why are they holding her if all she did was deposit money?" Another murmured, "This isn't how they treat other people." People began to shift their focus, no longer just recording a spectacle but documenting proof. One man moved forward slightly, asking to speak with management. He wanted answers. His voice was steady, old school, maybe ex-military. But Officer Brooks stepped between him and the front desk, told him this was a security matter, and that by interfering, he was complicating the investigation. Investigation of what? Kaya remained where she was, unmoving. Every second she stood there, she held more than a bank transaction. She carried every woman before her who had been mistaken for a thief, for a liar, for a problem. She also carried something else, something they had no way of seeing. Because while they tried to build a case against her with nothing, Kaya carried something very real. A truth so deeply rooted, so powerful, that their disbelief would soon come crashing into it headfirst. And when it did, none of them would be ready for what she actually was. They thought they were detaining a lie, but they had just disrupted a very dangerous truth. Kaya Bennett didn't move. She stood in that bank lobby as still as stone, her hands at her sides and her expression calm, quiet, collected. Yet inside her something burned. Not anger, no, Kaya had learned to master that years ago. What burned was memory, the weight of every moment like this one she had survived. The same routine with different faces, suspicion worn like a uniform, prejudice passed off as policy. From the outside, the scene seemed almost unreal. A woman in a bank, a deposit made, no shouting, no chaos. And yet, within moments, that woman stood surrounded by law enforcement. Not because of anything she'd done, but because of who she was to them. Someone who didn't belong, at least in their eyes. The air inside the bank thickened. Not with noise but tension. A stillness had crept over the lobby, the kind that made people realize they were witnessing something they'd likely scroll past later, but now they were right in the middle of it. The line at the teller window thinned as people quietly backed away. Customers chose distant seats. Some simply stared, stunned. Others, more aware, began to carefully record. No one said much. That's how you knew how serious it was. There was a hum of quiet voices now. A woman whispered into her phone just behind a marble pillar, relaying what she saw. They've got her surrounded. She didn't yell, she didn't argue. I think this is about race. It has to be. A man in a business suit stood near the exit, unmoving. He'd been there since the beginning. Laptop case still hanging from his shoulder, coffee half finished in his hand. Every few minutes he checked his watch. But he never left. Kaya didn't look at them. Not because she didn't care, but because this wasn't a performance. This wasn't about protest. It was survival. She knew how these moments could shift, how quickly stillness could be viewed as resistance. Silence mistaken for aggression. One wrong breath and she'd be accused of escalation. It wouldn't matter what the truth was, it never did. As a black woman, existing in calm during chaos was the only defense she had. Brooks and his fellow officers stood in loose formation now, pretending their presence was casual. But everyone could feel the heat. They were trying to make the story make sense, still hoping to find some detail out of place, some reason to justify the assumptions they'd already made. But there wasn't one. So they pressed harder. The questions came again. This time more clipped, more law enforcement than customer service. Her profession, her income, her travel patterns, whether she had ever had a brush with the law. Nothing was ever enough. Her credentials? Too polished, too unfamiliar. Her cash deposit? Unusual. Her stillness? Suspicious. Somehow, even her calm was taken as a threat. The manager emerged once more from the back offices. He'd been on and off several calls, most likely with regional leadership or legal. But no one offered clarity. No one stopped the officers. They all stood behind procedure, hiding like shadows behind a glass wall. Meanwhile, the phones filmed silently, catching every movement. Kaya's phone, still deep in her coat pocket, buzzed again. The third message. Another briefing missed. But she still didn't ask to call anyone again. They'd taken that from her the moment they called this a non-arrest detainment. The same way people like her were always made to stay quiet, trapped in limbo. They think they are safe when they invent new words for old behaviors. From the edges of the room, the murmurs got louder. People began asking questions out loud now. Why hasn't anyone explained what she did wrong? She gave them her ID, didn't she? One woman, early 20s, maybe a college student, now had her phone up, openly recording. Her eyes didn't blink. She made small notes out loud for her viewers, explaining what she'd seen, showing a timestamp on the wall clock, showing the impassive teller behind the glass. That video would soon hit 6 million views in less than 24 hours. Behind the scenes, as the officers tried to project calm, they were nervous. Brooks most of all. His certainty began to crack. Nothing was adding up. This woman standing before him wasn't folding. She wasn't reacting. She wasn't giving him anything to weaponize. No fear. No panic. No raised voice. His pride was now at war with reality. Several customers started to speak to one another. A father with his toddler watching from the children's play area whispered, "This is wrong." His daughter looked up at him and asked softly, "Is that lady in trouble?" He couldn't answer. Kaya noticed it all. She subtly scanned each corner of the room. Not just out of habit, but out of training. She logged every eye, every angle, every unspoken truth. Because this wasn't just about her anymore. It was now about every pair of eyes watching, recording, whispering, all feeling the gut pull of injustice and realizing no badge or blue shirt could clean it. Then it happened. A whisper turned into a question spoken aloud. "She's government. I'm telling you. I recognize that clearance card." The man who said it didn't press forward. He whispered sideways to another customer. But the words landed. Someone working here heard it too. One of the officers flinched at the mention. Brooks asked what was said, voice stilted. The man repeated it. Gently, firmly. That pressure shifted everything. Now, the officers started to second guess. Maybe this woman wasn't who they thought. Maybe they had made a mistake. But it was too late to walk back their assumptions without consequence. Brooks walked toward Kaya again, slower this time. She still didn't blink. And she gave them nothing. Not anger, not sorrow, not a reason to pity her. Because Kaya understood the real war here wasn't about her name or her account number. It was about how they built stories on people like her. And how, for the first time, they built that story under the wrong light, in front of the wrong crowd, to the wrong woman. A woman who couldn't be broken by doubt. Because her past carried the truth they'd just fumbled into. And when that truth finally cracked open, nothing they believed about her would survive. The crowd waited now not for answers but justice. And justice, Kaya knew, had never looked like it would today. The whispers spread through the lobby like static on a live wire. Soft but unmissable. Bouncing from one mouth to another as more people tried to make sense of what they were watching. Not everyone knew Kaya's name, but by now, nearly everyone in the bank had figured out what she wasn't. A criminal, a liar, or someone trying to get away with something. The energy had shifted. You could feel it. Even Officer Brooks, who had held his posture strong for the last 45 minutes, started to fidget. His voice wasn't so confident now, and the stiffness of authority sat like iron around his collar. Something was different. Not in Kaya, she hadn't changed. She remained composed, still in that same calm stance by the counter. But the rest of the room was slowly, quietly transforming around her. Because the question wasn't, is she telling the truth? Anymore. It was, what if we're all watching the system get caught in its lie? Kaya tilted her head slightly, just enough to glance toward her bag without breaking eye contact with anyone. She had waited long enough. For nearly an hour, she had listened to accusation wrapped in protocol, suspicion hidden behind smiled excuses, and fear camouflaged as policy. She hadn't said more than a few words, but maybe it was time to say a little more, or rather show it. She slowly reached into her handbag. No sudden movements, not even fast, just with the steadiness of someone who was sure of every breath they took. The officers stiffened, 3 of them now. The rest of the room tensed as well, watching closely, their phones held steady. But Kaya wasn't reaching for a weapon. She wasn't reaching for identification, not even her phone. Instead, she pulled out a slim black wallet. Unmarked, no logos, nothing flashy. She opened it and withdrew a single, dark green identification card. The kind that needed no explanation once you'd seen one. It carried a seal embossed with strength and discretion. No names were printed in bright gold or glossy ink. Just a series of numbers, a clearance level, and a title, Federal Intelligence Consultant. And just like that, the balance of power cracked. She didn't hold up the card as an announcement. She didn't wave it like a victory flag. She placed it calmly on the counter, letting it rest flat and sure beneath the eyes of the very people who had doubted her down to the fiber of her being. In that moment, no words were needed. Nothing about her changed. But the weight of their mistake became visible in the silence that followed. The teller blinked hard, realizing what she was looking at. The manager returned from the office, eyes wide and glassy. And Brooks, who had questioned her identity, her money, her right to stand in this very lobby, looked down at that card like it was burning a hole through the marble. This wasn't someone pretending. This was real. She wasn't just some woman with government work. She was part of something they didn't even have clearance to understand. Some authority didn't come with long speeches. It came folded in the confidence of people who don't need to prove themselves. Kaya had let them write their narrative, knowing it would bury itself the moment the truth surfaced. The man in the gray suit near the door let out an audible breath. Though subtle, it said what everyone felt. They messed with the wrong woman. She still hadn't spoken. But a look passed between her and Officer Brooks that couldn't be taught in any courtroom, in any training, or behind any badge. It was the look of understanding someone's career had just changed forever. He didn't speak either, because now whatever he said would be echoes of fear, not commands of control. For once, the people recording felt hope. Not because justice had been served, but because it had just begun knocking. The footage would have a new ending. This wouldn't be another video of someone being dragged out, cuffed, and condemned. This time there would be a twist. One of the bank patrons whispered to her phone's camera, She's federal. Oh my God. She's higher than him. Her voice was somewhere between awe and apology, like she hadn't realized until now just what she'd witnessed. What they all had. Kaya didn't gloat. She didn't smirk. Her presence remained grounded. Because this was the plan all along. Let them reveal everything they believe about you before they learn who you truly are. She glanced at the time on the bank's wall clock. She was late for her next classified meeting by now. But it didn't matter. This moment mattered more. The institution that had failed to protect her, the bank that had turned procedure into humiliation, was now exposed. Every second they had dragged their feet, denied her dignity, fueled the quiet fire now lighting through their system. Officer Brooks stepped back. Subtle. Almost like retreat. The problem was clear. If she made one phone call to the agency handler listed on that badge, this entire bank could go under federal review. And Brooks could be recalled faster than a faulty device. But Kaya didn't reach for her phone. She picked up her card, placed it back in the wallet, and closed the flap. She had made her point. Quietly. With grace. That was the kind of justice she had learned over years of walking into rooms where she was underestimated, misidentified, or ignored, until it was too late. Behind her, someone clapped once. Then another. Not a performance, not a celebration. Just recognition. The slow understanding of dignity being honored, finally. Because they saw now what they hadn't before. All Kaya needed was space to show up as herself. And the moment they gave her that space, even for a second, their entire foundation cracked. The bank manager mumbled something to the teller, who now whispered apologies no one believed. The security team filtered away, pretending to check something else, trying too late to soften their presence. But it didn't matter. The truth was already out. And somewhere behind a blinking recording light, the story had already begun to go viral. A woman walked into a bank. Calm, composed, ready to do her job. And despite their efforts to strip her image away, she revealed a power so real, it left silence in its wake. They hadn't just detained the wrong person. They'd interrupted the kind of woman institutions should be built to protect. But now, they'd built her stage. And soon, the world would know exactly who had been in that lobby. Justice wasn't coming. She was justice. Standing politely, in sneakers. They had made a mistake. Not just a simple error in judgment, but the kind of mistake that would echo louder than the security radios clipped to their belts. The kind of mistake you couldn't undo with a quiet apology in the manager's office. It was the kind people wrote about. The kind that didn't disappear when the uniforms did. Officer Brooks still hadn't moved. Not physically, at least. But something in his posture, the way his shoulders dipped, the illusion of control fading from his face, told the truth. The realization had hit. The badge Kaya had revealed wasn't ceremonial. It wasn't fake or borrowed or misunderstood. Came from somewhere higher. Much higher than he would ever reach. And the expression on Kaya's face hadn't changed. She was still calm, still collected. But now, underneath the poise, was that silence that comes after the first earthquake, right before the world starts rearranging itself. No titles had been shouted, no departments named, but what that simple green badge embedded with golden threads had quietly revealed wasn't just job status. It was authority, sovereignty even, especially in this setting. Because the clearances Kaya held didn't just unlock files and programs, they unlocked power. The kind average people were trained not to question. But they had questioned her anyway, and the ticking of the clock up on the bank's wall suddenly got louder. Everything inside the bank had stalled. Time, thought, purpose. No one spoke with certainty now, not even the manager. The teller fidgeted under her desk, eyes flicking to the security mirror. Two customers near the waiting area set their phones down, one of them whispering something about background checks, top secret, and intel leakage. The irony was sharp. Everything they had thought about her, criminal, threat, outsider, had turned out to be the farthest possible truth. She wasn't just cleared. She lived in the shadows of intelligence, operatives, and international briefings. She wasn't just a small government worker. She was a member of the shield most citizens never saw. While they ran her ID through retail-level scans, She had agents waiting on encrypted lines. While they debated her identity, higher authorities had likely already flagged her case, because someone of her clearance going off-grid, even for an hour, triggered bells they couldn't hear through their plastic headsets. Kaya hadn't wanted to pull her badge. It wasn't pride or secrecy. It was a principle. But once their actions crossed the line, not just doubt, but public detainment, unlawful search, and undermining her without cause, she knew the choice was no longer personal. It became procedural, strategic, the kind that left records, and those were already being written. Just then, the thick glass of the bank's entry door opened quietly, and everything shifted again. A woman in a gray tailored suit stepped inside. She moved with silence and efficiency, heels clicking low, badge already in hand. She didn't look like anyone in local law enforcement. She didn't need to. The badge she wore was darker, rectangular, and far more powerful in the right circles. Department of Intelligence Oversight. Not one of the officers inside the bank said a word. Not even Brooks. Not even when she walked past the rope and came to stand beside Kaya. There was no hug, no warm greeting. Just brief eye contact. Understanding, wordless and complete. The moment the oversight officer acknowledged Kaya with the briefest nod, the room understood. She wasn't just a consultant or a contractor. She was embedded in something woven so deeply into national security that even her partial exposure required official presence. That badge was the final nail in the story they'd tried to write. And now, the room didn't feel like a branch bank anymore. It felt like a courtroom without walls. Everyone had become a witness. What had unfolded here wasn't just discrimination. It wasn't just overreach. It was obstruction of a federal officer in the middle of protected duties. And Kaya hadn't raised her voice, hadn't brandished her work like a threat, because she didn't have to. That was the difference between those who demand respect and those who already live within it. The oversight officer reviewed something Kaya handed her, likely a secondary ID or formal log entry. Then, quietly, she spoke to the nearest officer, drawing him aside. Another pulled out a notepad, scribbling hastily, cheeks pale. The manager looked ready to disappear. Phones lowered for now, but the damage was done. People had seen. People had filmed. Screenshots would spread. Phrases like profiling, CIA, wrongful detainment, laced over slow-motion music in videos captioned. And then the twist dropped. Kaya remained unbothered. She glanced once at the bank's internal clock. Her hand lightly brushed her sleeve. She was still late, but something bigger than any meeting had taken place. This was exposure. Not of her, but them. After a few minutes of cold efficiency, the oversight officer stepped forward again, now holding a typed statement form addressed to the law enforcement officers present. No emotion in her voice. No room for interpretation. It was official now. There would be investigation, letters, reviews, and likely fallout. Kaya hadn't asked for it, but she'd earned every second of it through grace that refused to fold, and proof that refused to stay silent. The truth wasn't just revealed. It had exploded, not with fire or fists, but gravity, whispered proof, quiet identification, unshakable self-belief. Justice, in a linen sweater and sneakers, calmly watching everyone else scramble to put the pieces of her silence back together. She left the bank without spectacle. The oversight officer walked with her back to the car. Door opened with a special tap and lock, engine already humming low. Inside, Kaya finally exhaled, not in relief, in calculation, because now, with the story on tape, with names and badges caught on camera, and timelines securely logged, her report would hold weight heavier than reputation. It would ripple, and somewhere in a department without public hours, someone was preparing for the disciplinary process that Officer Brooks never saw coming. Kaya hadn't needed revenge. She'd already rewritten the power map, and made sure the world saw what it looks like when quiet power speaks in full. The headlines started quietly. A viral clip shared on a community blog. A tweet with 3 words, "She held power," and a 30-second video that showed a composed black woman standing silently as officers hovered, the tension wrapping around her like smoke. That would have been enough for curiosity. enough to hint at a story underneath the skin of everyday life. But then came the longer clips, stitched together by citizens, captioned by strangers, viewed by millions. The story spilled like ink. A professional woman, wrongfully profiled at a bank, is revealed to be a covert federal agent. The parts people didn't know yet, the paperwork, protocol breaches, federal response, they were all still happening behind glass doors and sealed conversations. But the most powerful parts had already escaped. They lived in public now. Each second of video was slowed, analyzed, repeated. The silence, her silence, during the entire encounter became the focal point. Everyone wanted to know who she was, what she represented, and how this had happened in plain sight. The bank tried damage control. A practiced apology released late at night, calling the situation regrettable. Words softened by corporate polish. But in a digital world, too much had already been captured. Within 2 days, Kaya Bennett's name became known, not because she spoke it, but because someone, a low-level government employee who recognized her from closed briefings, confirmed her credibility to a journalist off record. That breadcrumb opened the gates. Suddenly, media couldn't look away. An internal investigation opened within 72 hours at the Richmond Police Department. Officer Brooks was suspended pending review. But administrative leave meant little when the footage refused to fade. Kaya did not speak publicly. She never had to. While the world searched for her voice, she was somewhere behind tightly locked doors, entering secure halls built with codes and clearance levels. Her name had already traveled through federal channels. Her agency didn't operate like law enforcement. They didn't run toward flashing cameras. They didn't put her story into spin. They filed a security breach report. That form was far heavier than a viral tweet. Inside the report, Kaya had quietly logged everything. Times, faces, exact phrases, enforcement overreach, mishandling of federal credentials. She didn't call it racism. She didn't need to. The language was wrapped in policy even as the reality screamed discrimination. The Department of Intelligence Oversight, after reviewing their own footage and badge scans, affirmed that Kaya had been operating under an active security assignment. While her drop at the bank wasn't sensitive in itself, her presence and any delay breached classified timing protocols, which meant Officer Brooks had cost her department a documented risk. Now the error wasn't just offensive. It was measurable. The processor of justice moved faster than usual on this one. The agency couldn't afford not to respond. This was one of their own. Public trust wasn't usually their priority, but this kind of incident dragged them into the light. Brooks's disciplinary hearing unfolded quietly, away from news cameras, but the damage built fast. An exhaustive review of his service record showed multiple complaints flagged for excessive checking, unfounded suspicion, all with one common thread: black and brown individuals treated with a different kind of scrutiny. Stories began surfacing online, each tagged with the same feelings Kaya had felt. Silenced, surrounded, treated with suspicion first and humanity later, if at all. One former teacher. One retired veteran. One teenage boy stopped outside a library. Different incidents, same name attached. Now, even those complaints couldn't be dismissed as he said, she said. Not when the clearest complaint of all had gone viral. The consequences finally arrived. Brooks was not quietly sent away or offered resignation with benefits. His law enforcement credentials were stripped, his badge deactivated. The Richmond Police Department, now under increasing pressure, held a press conference, not to explain Brooks' mistakes, but to announce collaboration with state-led officials on systemic reform. That's what Kaya had hoped for. Not punishment, structural change. Because she never wanted a man fired. She wanted a system fixed. The bank reached out through legal channels. Fear had seeded their every move since the incident. They offered settlement, termed financial mediation, and issued another statement of apology. This time Kaya's name was used with consent. They publicly acknowledged their role in enabling the incident. The teller and manager were reassigned pending equity training and internal review. But no one knew what hurt them more: the legal response quietly encouraged by Kaya's agency, or the global ridicule that followed their name. The financial community took notice. One of their investors quietly pulled a six-figure stake the following month, citing values misalignment. Meanwhile, Kaya kept working. She returned to classified briefings, stepped into rooms where power carried no nameplates. But what had changed was outside of those walls. In banks, in businesses, in conversations, people talked about her, about how her poise fractured institutions built to deny dignity without questions. She became a symbol of what quiet resistance could look like when backed by substance. She had never asked for the spotlight, but she didn't shy from it either. Her story wasn't plastered across morning shows with sound bites or red carpets. Her face never filled documentary trailers. She simply lived in the minds of those who now ask themselves a new question before exercising power. What if the person standing in front of me isn't who I assumed? And what if I'm the one who should be questioned? At her agency, they quietly installed a new training module. It featured a scenario eerily similar to what happened. Its title was 3 words: assume nothing first. And in the end, that's what Kaya gave the world. Without protest signs, without staged interviews, without rage. She exposed not just the harm of profiling, but the colossal risk of underestimating a woman built on precision, patience, and quiet power. Months passed, but the air inside the walls of First Commonwealth Bank no longer felt the same. The scent of polished marble and coffee remained, but something deeper had shifted, something built into the bones of the place. What once stood as routine procedure now wore the weight of careful reconsideration. Not just because of the cameras, not even because of the headlines, but because of her. Her name echoed without need for volume. Kaya Bennett. What happened that day was no longer seen as a one-off error or an unfortunate misunderstanding. It had been dissected, studied, and most importantly, believed. For far too long, the experiences of women like Kaya slipped through the cracks of denial, reduced to apologies wrapped in silence. But this time, the truth refused to disappear. It had been recorded, viewed, shared, and stitched into the memory of a world increasingly less willing to blink past injustice. First came the audit. Not requested, demanded. An independent review firm was commissioned to investigate the bank's bias training, hiring practices, and employee response standards. It uncovered what Kaya already knew from a single hour in that lobby. The system was never neutral. It only wore the uniform of equality without doing the internal work. From teller scripts to branch policy, everything changed. Cash deposits over $5,000 now required silent authentication, not verbal doubt. Employees were retrained to ask all questions with care, not suspicion. Not just with politeness, but with presence, understanding that dignity should never depend on appearances. A new department was born within the bank's leadership structure, DEEP, Diversity, Equity, and Ethical Protection. And Kaya wasn't the face of it. She didn't want to be, but she was its foundation. In Richmond, a new whisper developed around town. Quiet acknowledgments between strangers in the grocery line, at gas stations, in airports. That's the bank woman. Not with mockery, with pride. Not everyone knew Kaya's story in full. Many only knew it in pieces. But the essence reached them. She had become proof that justice didn't have to shout to be heard. Across the state, police precincts implemented changes too. The department that had once stood defensively behind Officer Brooks was now defenseless against the facts. Community pressure, legal force, and public backlash had stripped away the culture of convenience they once hid behind. New pre-engagement training became mandatory, not just for recruits but veterans. A whole new module, the Kaya test, as it was nicknamed, was installed at the State Academy, testing officers on judgment when credentials meet bias. The test wasn't about clearance levels. It was about curiosity versus assumption, respect versus suspicion, humanity before authority. And even more quietly, the federal agency Kaya worked for began reforming their post-incident protocols. A classified memo was circulated within 3 intel departments under the heading Field Agent Public Encounters, Balancing Identity and Integrity. In it, Kaya's filed statement served as example not of misstep but of mastery. Grace under public fire, followed by restoration through policy. Behind closed doors, her peers saw what she had built. a blueprint for survival in a system not yet healed. She hadn't just represented herself. She had rewritten the process for others coming after her. And still, she never spoke at rallies, rejected book offers, turned down interviews from national networks begging to tell her story, because she didn't need to sell it. She had already lived it, and life doesn't always need a camera angle. Far from the boardrooms and courtrooms, Kaya's peace came in quieter places now. Mornings with tea and silence, reading long-form articles about community reform projects, brisk walks around Capitol Hill in the anonymity of fall coats and scarves. She still wore her badge, still moved in circles most people never glimpsed. But now, everywhere she went, she carried a new ripple, one not built from secrets, but impact. And occasionally, very occasionally, someone would approach her in public. Not for selfies or proof they had found her, but with gratitude. One woman, years older, once leaned over at a cafe as Kaya poured sugar into her coffee. "You looked like me," the woman said kindly, "and you held your ground like none of us were watching." But we were. Kaya smiled as she stirred the spoon and nodded once. Those were the only victories that ever mattered. The uncounted ones. In Washington, a congressional leader quietly referenced her story, not by name, but by outline, during a bipartisan hearing on accountability in banking procedures. "A woman trained to protect this country," he said, "was nearly arrested because someone refused to believe her. What does that say about the structures meant to protect us all?" No one answered aloud, but the floor grew still. The world didn't erupt when Kaya Bennett stood her ground that day, but it pivoted. It chose to learn, it chose to fix, and it chose to remember, not through viral trends, but through policy rewrites, professional shifts, institutional acknowledgments that whispered with tension. We were wrong. That's what quiet power does. It doesn't finish with headlines. It lingers through actions that keep unfolding. So the next time a woman walks into a bank with history behind her name and strength in her silence, maybe, just maybe, she won't have to prove who she is just to be treated like she belongs. Maybe we're finally listening. And maybe we're finally learning. Thank you for following Kaya's story. If her quiet strength moved you, if you believe the world needs more accountability, and if you've ever stood somewhere demanding respect without raising your voice, this story was for you. Hit that subscribe button to support our platform and share your thoughts. Together, we raise the volume on dignity, one story at a time.